Okay, hello and welcome everybody. We are back to our lovely favorite little video notes with Lombana over here. Anyway, um, I'm happy to be here in your home somewhere listening to me. Hey familia, todo mundo. Things you do for these kids. Anyway, so I hope everybody is doing well. Today we're going to be talking about problem solving, and that is where I need you guys actually, you're going to label that at the top. You're going to name it problem solving, video notes, write that really big, and then remember to give that little space um, for the class notes, like not so much away from the margin, but enough that you could write some notes that we discuss in class. So, problem solving, what exactly is it? So, we use different ways of solving problems because we need different methods in order to do this because not everything is a one size fit all. So, the first top two things that we kind of use, kind of rule of thumb, is the first one is going to be, and it's not in here, but it is going to be called trial and error. That's the first one. And this is basically when we try out different solutions. So we're writing this down. Let me, because you guys like when I say that. So the first thing I want you to do is your first subtopic is problem solving method. So that will be your first subtopic. And you might want to number them. That's how I kind of have it organized. Like the first type of method that we use is trial and error, and you see that up there. And trial and error, so we're writing this down, is that we try out different solutions until we find the one that works. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that. So it's basically and exactly what you guys know about trial and error. It's trying out different solutions in order for you to find that one that works. Now, this is actually can be very effective if you want to find different solutions, if this is definitely into that whole divergent thinking, I don't want to add there. And it's kind of just testing out, right? Now, the good thing is that we don't have to do a lot of trial and error anymore because literally YouTube, right? YouTube has solved everybody's how to do something. So it's eliminated the trial and error. But some examples of trial and error could be, trying to build, IKEA furniture. That is definitely a trial and error, even if there's instructions. Um, trying to figure out a like the different methods of studying, right? Those are just some examples. Okay, so make sure to add those examples as well. And I will be checking for examples, so add that in there, guys. So the next one is number two, which is basically algorithms. This is another method, which is algorithm. This is when we have to use like logical rules, procedures. There's usually like a step by step that is going to guarantee you that solution. Okay, so it's kind of like this is not so much like trial and error that you're trying over and over again. This is more like there's a rule and this is how you need to follow. So for example, this you will usually do this a lot when it comes to like math, recipes, having to, build a house, right? You definitely don't want to use trial and error. You want to use an algorithm in order for things to work, right? So this one, and writing this down as well, is this one does not go into divergent thinking. This is more convergent thinking, right? You're looking for one solution and there's one way to do it, and that's it. Okay. This is great with certain problem solving, right? Like I just said, if I need to build a home, I definitely want to use an algorithm to build it, or if I have to build a car or something like that. Um, but this is not great, for example, for relationships, right? Using an algorithm for a relationship doesn't exactly work. So those are just some examples. Now, the next one we use, which is number three, is called heuristics. And this is kind of like the one we use the most because it's literally like just a shortcut. Like, here's a problem, and then we kind of dig in unconsciously into like our schemas and other ways we've seen people solving it, and then boom, we just solve the problem. Okay, so it's kind of like a quick shortcut to save time, right? So like for instance, if I'm trying to think of something that happened to me that I needed to do this. Um, let's say, I'm cooking and I don't have butter, right? I may use something else in substitute of that. Or I know there's like substitute for, I don't remember what it is. Obviously, I don't cook or bake, but they could like replace it with like applesauce or milk. I don't know, whatever, any of those. But it's kind of like finding other um, solutions like quick, right? It's always quick. Now, with this one, also writing this down is it does not guarantee a solution, right? As opposed to an algorithm, you're guaranteed the solution and the answer, and boom, here you go. And heuristics, since you're kind of doing like a shortcut and just kind of like spare the moment, or you're thinking about from other past experiences, this is not always guaranteed, okay? So for example, using heuristics, right? We're going to a restaurant and you're out of town, you're going to this new town and you have to pick a restaurant. Now we have Yelp or Google Maps. But before that, you kind of had to just decide, well, which restaurant is the packed, right? Like which one is full, because that's usually the good restaurant. Or if you don't want to wait, you go to the one that has less. But then it's kind of like that rule of thumb of like, well, if the restaurant is empty, that means it must not be good. If it's packed, it's good. So things like that. So it's kind of like little tricks that we learn along the way. Now, the next one is going to be, hold on. So like this is an algorithm. Imagine if you've ever seen Big Bang Theory, this guy has algorithms literally for everything. And there are people that are very much algorithm based problem solving. So everything is like, like a logical way of solving stuff. And, it's great for some things, but other things like relationships with people, it's really hard to do. So anyway, and then of course heuristics is more of that short, quick rule of thumb. Now, if I had to use these strategies for problem solving, right? If I needed to unscramble this, using algorithms, I could find, right, about 907,000 combinations. So using algorithms probably wouldn't be the right thing because it has this many answers. And heuristics, you start using, right, these shortcuts that like the two Y's don't always go together. You don't know, there's no words like that. And there's other ways of solving this, right? Like trying to figure out, well, it could be like the two O's, or since you're primed, the priming effect does happen, which is basically you're in this class right now listening to psychology, and most likely those words can actually be maybe psychology, right? It's easier for us to find psychology than maybe something else. Okay, and somebody could find something else, you guys let me know in class. All right, the next thing that we use is what's called insight. And this insight is basically this, so this is number 4, right? And then you're writing this down, and it's kind of like a sudden realization of the solution to the problem. So this is when, and I'll say it again, it's like this sudden, like aha moment, kind of, that's what we call it, like this aha moment of the solution, finding the solution to a problem. So it's kind of like you're thinking about something and you're trying to build, let's say, I don't know, a bike, right? Trying to build a bike and it's not coming together. And and then all of a sudden, you step away, you think about it, right? You leave your mind, kind of your cognition there running. And then it's like all of a sudden, like poof, oh my gosh, that's what it is. Right? That's how I can solve this problem. Sometimes that happens like in class or in school, like in with math, that you're doing something and then you're like, oh my God, all of a sudden you realize what the answer is. So that's basically insight. Now, and we will talk a little bit more about insight because you need to know about this guy named Wolfgang. Wait, so I'm sorry, still not easy with this. Okay, Mr. Kohler, Wolfgang Kohler. That's an F in there, but Anyway, but Wolfgang Kohler is actually, he did a study with chimps. And I will have, there's a picture somewhere in here with the chimps. And he needed to study to see, like, he basically had like a bunch of boxes in this room. And then there was like a hanging banana one. I'll show you the video because it's really cute. The poor little chimps. And he found, they were trying to solve the problem. It wasn't working. The chimps like were trying to stack it and that didn't work. And then like all of a sudden, they had figured it out. So this is, this guy's contributes to this whole idea of insight and deals with the little chimps. Okay. Now, something that's not in here, which is number 5 that I want you to write. And number 5 is called intuition, right? It's that gut feeling that you know that that's the solution to it. Like you can't explain it why you think that way, but you just do. So I'm sure you guys have heard it's like the gut feeling. And it's so for definition, you could say definitely gut feeling, but also I want you to add in there, it's like coming up with a conclusion or like a solution without even realizing that like it's not a conscious thought. You just feel it, right? If that makes sense. Under intuition too, just put it's effortless and it's immediate. It's kind of like this automatic way of just like, I know this is the right answer. Now, there's been a lot of research on there recently about intuition. And what they're saying, which is really interesting, and going back to like our thoughts, is that when we are faced with a problem, our brain is like unconsciously trying to solve it. And we also are trying to, you know how I always tell you, your brain is always looking for patterns. So they're saying that that intuition, it's not so much this gut feeling, but it's more like your brain has figured out with all the schemas and the patterns that we all have that they've kind of like made it as if you just automatically knew, right? That that was the answer. But they're saying that, it seems like your brain is still problem solving without you even realizing it's doing it. So that's that. Now, I'm not going to go into this confirmation bias and fixation because these are actually the problems that can occur during when you are problem solving. So we'll get back to that. But here, my boy Wolfgang Kohler with his little experiment and the chimps, and they were trying to figure it out, stacking the things wasn't working, and then all of a sudden, boom, the chimp was able to put the boxes together. So very cute. Okay. We're not going to do this, but you can look at it. You want to figure it out because I'm about to go to the next slide, which has the answers. So pause if you need to. If you have me on super speed or not listening, then here's the answer. See, probably got your attention now. So there you go. This is another one of how to create a candle mount using these things, right? Like if I gave you this, okay, guys, make a candle mount, and you would have to be able to do this, and you could think about it, and then would be the solution to that. But yes, okay. So then the next subtopic is going to be problems with problem solving. Just put it like that. Okay, so it's problems with problem solving. I know it sounds bad. Do not write this. Okay, remember decoration. Okay, and we're gonna actually start with heuristics. So you know how I said that, okay, those are like the shortcuts. We kind of just, use our schemas or what we know of, and then we try to solve the problem. So with these heuristics, there's certain types of heuristics that help us. They help us problem solve, but since they're not perfect, right, or they're not an algorithm, then there's some mistakes which affect our problem solving. So the first one I want you to write down is going to be, and I'm going to write it here, first problem is going to be what's called the anchoring heuristics, or sometimes it's called anchoring effect. It doesn't matter. They're all pretty much the same thing, okay? It could also be anchoring effect, all right? And this is basically a mental shortcut. We're writing this down or an automatic response that is based on your past knowledge or experience. Okay, so it's kind of like an anchor, right? We anchor back to what we know. So for example, um, if I ask you, is Alaska cold all the time? And you would probably say yes, because it's what I know, right? I know that Alaska is cold. But in reality, Alaska is not always cold, and there's actually parts of Alaska that are not like they're not cold all the time. Um, Another example would be and actually car salesmen do this. So what they do is kind of like a priming. This is anchoring is a little bit of a priming, but this is where, let's say, like when you go buy a car, so this is a good example to put in there. When you go buy a car and they put a sticker price, right? And the price they put is always higher. And then what they do, right? Obviously they're trying to haggle you, but you always go back to like the original price, right? You always go back to, well, man, I'm getting a good deal because they took off, $3,000. So now the car is only like 65,000 instead of, 68,000. So you're going in there and you're like, oh, okay, I'm getting a deal. But really, they're doing that because they want to anchor you to that sale price, right? So like for instance, like TJ Maxx and all those places like Ross or uh, well, you get it. Okay. Those guys, they always put the original price of the item. And sometimes I'm even like, is this even true? But you'll see the price and then you see the price that they're selling. So you'll look at that and you're like, oh, wow, I'm getting a good deal because you're going back to that reference of that like past knowledge, right? Like what it used to cost. Okay. So then we have the next one is going to be, I'm gonna skip a couple of these because they have nothing to do with this, or they wrote it a little different. Let me just go back to here. It's driving you guys crazy, but sure, it's okay. All right. Next one is gonna be what's called representative heuristics. Okay, and this is where you guys get to hear my funny stories of how these lovely heuristics got me in some situations that were quite interesting and a little funny. But you guys will hear about that in class. But we're going to start with representative heuristics. And this is when, so here's the example. So it's going to be when you're forming opinions or thoughts based on how well the situation matches your prototype or matches the prototype. Okay, so what you're doing is you're creating an assumption based on if this situation fits your prototype. And then based on that, then you'll be like, okay, yes. So for instance, if I go to a party, right? I'll give you an example of what happened to my daughter. So my daughter was going to a like her first senior party. And then I was like, you know what? This, it's gonna be like this or that. I'm just like telling her, being cautious, because that is what we all know, right? Like that's our prototype of a senior party. There might be legal drinking and whatnot, and dancing and music. So I'm like, talking to her about it. And then I pick her up after the party, and she's like, Mom, you disappointed me. I'm disappointed. And I was like, what happened? And she goes, it was nothing like I expected, right? It didn't fit her prototype. So guess what? She didn't have a great time. No, I'm kidding. She had a great time because she started playing dominoes with the parents. So that's what she was doing. She had a great time, but it definitely didn't fit my prototype. But we could judge that, right? And I could be like, wow, that party's really lame. Or, you go somewhere like a restaurant and there's not a lot of people and it doesn't fit your prototype, right? You're probably like, oh, it's probably not a good thing. Okay, and we'll talk a lot more about these because this is so good of how representative heuristic actually affects so much and we're so quick to judge our situation. And this one, I need you guys also to include there that this is how we form stereotypes, okay, as well as making poor choices because of that. Not so much the stereotype, but because of these um, prototypes that we create. Okay? So I will be telling you guys about my once in a lifetime chance encounter with the three Miami Heat players that never happened. It didn't happen because of my lovely representative heuristics. But I'll tell you guys that story in class. Anyway, next one is going to be availability heuristics. And this one has to do with your memory, okay? Not just your memory or how quickly you can recall something. So make sure you write that this one has to do with memory. The other one, representative, it's like representative of your prototype. So you might want to include that up there under representative heuristics. But availability heuristic has to do with memory and recall. So for here, this is you estimate the likelihood of events happening based on your available memory. Okay? So it's kind of you estimate, like, for instance, if you see in the news, so here's an example. If you see in the news that there was a plane crash and then you are flying, somewhere going on vacation, you're going to assume that like you're gonna get scared, you're gonna get worried that there's gonna be a plane crash. When plane crashes, they're actually less common than anything else. But since that's fresh in your mind, you're going to assume that it's gonna happen, soon. Just like in one of the classes we were talking about like school shootings, the fear of that. And that's another thing, right? Like we think it's very common, or especially when we're in that environment, it's, we believe that this is happening more often, right? Than what it is, or the fear, right, of it happening. Though it's legit, but we think it's gonna happen more often than it does. Um, so this one is, you guys will see, is going to be my terrorist story. And or it's not even terrorist, it was like hijacking. I thought we were getting hijacked. And this has to do with, obviously, the the availability of the memory of what had happened to me and stuff like that. So we'll discuss in class. It's a little funny, but it also made me realize big time of how often our own kind of these heuristics get in the way to really analyze the situation properly. Like how quick we are to jump to conclusions is really what happens sometimes when we rely too much on these heuristics. But we'll definitely talk a lot more about that. Okay, now the fourth thing, right? So now we get into this one that's been lingering here, which is mental set, okay? Or also what's called mindset. And I know you guys have heard of it if you've had meter, which is awesome because mindset is basically the way that you approach the problems and issues, right? So it's kind of like the mental approach of how you're gonna solve problems and issues. So like some people are like, no, I'm gonna say what I want. Other people are just more like they don't want confrontation. Okay. Now there are two types of mindset, and then what you have is fixed mindset and growth mindset. And Meter does a phenomenal job of really teaching you guys this, and something that really is life changing for so many people because it really, the brain actually, can change and improve. Like, so let me rewind back. So, fixed mindset is that, you're fixed on this is the solution and that's it. There's no other way. I don't care what anybody tells me, this is the way to do it, right? So, for instance, if you cook, I don't know, cheesecake, right? And somebody's like, oh, there's another way of doing it. And then you're like, no, this is the way I do it. This is what tastes good. That's it. This. That's fixed mindset. Growth mindset would be that, okay, there's other possibilities, and I love that when it comes to growth mindset, because it's always like, what are the possibilities that I have in life, right? With every situation. So it's always good to have that growth mindset, because having that fixed mindset, right, you just get smaller, your world gets smaller, as opposed to a growth mindset, you are being able to see like the possibilities in life. Okay, now the next one is, I don't want to go into that yet, but it is one that we've talked about. Oh, see, it zooms in again, guys. Lovely. This is, I think, number 5. Let's go back. It is. Fine. Which is confirmation bias. And you guys have heard about confirmation bias. I'll say it again because it's really important. But this is when you only focus on, and we're writing this down, is that you only focus on the things or information that's going to support the way you think and your beliefs. Okay, and then you're going to ignore everything else that goes against your belief. Okay, and we're definitely going to talk a lot about this. We're going to give examples of all these different ways that we do this, as well as what can we do to use this, because these are great tools to have for problem solving, but also they kind of sometimes get in the way, or don't allow us to see, like, have a growth mindset, right? um, so with confirmation bias, this is very much an example of anchoring heuristics. We kind of always go back, even though, like, for instance, I know somebody, let's say, like, I have a friend of mine, and they're like not being good friends, right? Like, they're talking bad about the other person, and then I'm telling them, like, hey, telling my other friend, like, hey, this person is like always talking bad. Maybe you shouldn't be friends. Now, with confirmation bias, if their other friend number 2, thinks that that friend number 1 that I'm talking about is nice, then they might be like, no, 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 not really. Okay, and they might ignore that. So you always kind of go back to that, what you know. So another confirmation bias, well, we'll talk about that more, so these videos don't take forever. Okay. The next one is going to be fixation. Okay. And then this one has a little bit to do. So I want you to write number 6. Oh, zoomed in again. Number 6 is going to be fixation. Okay. And fixation is basically your inability to see a problem from a new perspective. Okay. This is definitely a fixed mindset. So fixation is that inability to see a problem from a new perspective. Okay. And you basically just fix yourself on one solution and that's it, right? Um, Definitely a fixed mindset. Now, under fixation, I want you to add the word functional fixedness. And functional fixedness is that you think that the things that you're looking at only has its one purpose or one function, and there's no other way to to use it. So for instance, my favorite has always been like a brush, right? If you have functional fixedness, you're going to see a brush is only to brush your hair, and that's it. Now, if you have more of a growth mindset, or you are a divergent thinker, right, you are going to think of it for other things, such as what I would do when I was younger. I would use it like to hammer, like to like put a nail on the wall to hang something. I would use it as a hammer. I think that's pretty much what I used it for. But even after, like, if there was a brush I didn't want to use anymore and I could use it to clean or do something with it, I would use it, right? So it's kind of like functional fixedness is like, okay, a shoe is just a shoe and that's it, right? So we don't want to be functional fixedness. We want to be a little bit more growth mindset, especially if we're trying to solve a problem. Like, here's a perfect example for my lovely students when they tell me, like, well, miss, I forgot the notebook. I couldn't do the notes. And I'm like, well, there's paper out there. Any paper will do, and you could just glue it back in there. And they're like, oh, yeah, right? So functional fixedness could get us like stuck. And we'll talk some more about that, of how we That happens to us, right? We think of one solution and we're stuck there. Okay. And then the other one is overconfidence. And we've talked about this one as well. Overconfidence is confident in our own abilities, right? Even if we're not correct. So we're even if we have like, we have a lot of self-doubt, we still think that for the most part, what we say or what we do is good, and you know they're confident in it. And under overconfidence, I want you to just kind of drop a little seed in there with this word, which is self-serving bias. Okay? So self-serving bias is basically when we're evaluating ourselves, we're gonna overly be overly favorable for ourselves, right? Like, so an example of this would be when you take those little quizzes, right? I forgot what they're called. You guys will probably tell me, or you're probably saying it's a computer. But Miss Lamana's a little tired, so I can't think right now. But anyway, it was little quizzes online. But there are ways like when we're doing that, where we want us to look for ourselves to look okay and not so bad. Okay, and I think we've talked about that as well. Now, the next one is going to be, and I think we're at 8, is what's called belief perseverance. So belief perseverance is very much like functional fixedness, or having that fixation, which is you're clinging, and you're going to write this down. You are sticking to your own personal beliefs or certain personal beliefs, even if new information proves you wrong. Okay. So not so much like confirmation bias, right? Confirmation bias is that you're only looking at things that confirm and then kind of ignoring everything else. This one is that you're going to stick to it no matter what, even if there's like literally new information of that proves you wrong, right? So of course, like people, examples like flatlanders, right? The people that believe that the world is flat, even though there's plenty of evidence, and here they are still thinking that. Okay, now I want you to add under belief perseverance the word cognitive dissonance. And we're going to talk a lot about this, not just in this unit, and a lot of these we kind of repeat over again, and little seeds I like to drop there for you guys. And cognitive dissonance is when you are presented with evidence that goes against your belief, okay? It goes against, wait, erase that. That is not true. Hold on. I'm reading something else. I'm like, no. So cognitive dissonance is basically when your actions and your belief do not match. Okay. So let's say you believe that smoking is bad, right? So then you believe smoking is bad, but then you're hanging out with your friends and they're like, well, come on, try smoking. And then you're like, in your mind, you're like, well, I know this is really bad for me and I should never do this ever, ever. And then the other side of you is saying, well, it's not really a big deal, right? Like you do it. So it creates a tension, right? Like what you believe in and what you're doing do not match. So then at that moment, what happens, this is cognitive dissonance, right? That uncomfortable feeling. So of your thoughts and actions not matching. So then what you do is either you change your actions, right, to meet your thoughts, or you change your thoughts to match your actions. Okay, you should add that in there. So for someone in cognitive dissonance, right, they're at a party and their friends are like, oh, here, smoke. And, it comes to a point of like, what do I do? So the person decides either I'm going to stick to my beliefs that this is wrong, or I'm going to change my beliefs in order to fit my actions. Okay? Now, the next one is going to be number 9, which is framing. Now, framing is kind of like how an issue or a question is presented to you, then you will interpret it, right? You will give it a specific type of meaning. So I'll say it again because that was probably confusing. I'm here like trying to read things at the same time. And maybe shouldn't be doing these videos so late. So this is when an issue or question is presented and in a certain way that infers a specific type of meaning. Okay? So let's say, for instance, if a teacher wants to say that a class is difficult, all I will have to say is that 10% will fail. Okay? 10% will fail and 90% will pass. Now, some people are going to get stuck in the way in the first wording, right? Of 10% will fail. And that's why a lot of times when you see like advertisements or like for anything that they're selling, like, oh, this is like 90% safe or whatever, they're gonna say that instead of like, well, there's a 5% chance it's not safe, right? Or a 10% chance it's not safe. So it's easier to say that, 90% will pass, but 10 will fail. So a lot of times we'll be like, oh, okay, not a big deal. But if we put it the other way around, it would definitely change. Okay. And I think that's pretty much it. The other one is language, and we're done. And I think that's pretty good, hopefully. All right, guys, we are done. Farewell. I'll see you soon.